So I guess to that point.
Okay.
Actually, tell us about
To
that
be
tweet.
fair,
What is that tweet?
This tweet was implied when
It's now time to get into our interview portions for today. We actually do have Andy Collins, who's going to be joining with us, also known as Andersin. He's the player that actually made some heads turn when he started playing with the Slimy Boogerman over in the past of 2021, and most recently of Dark Zero fame, and now the IGL for Nearest Airports, where you guys have been owning up the Tier 2 scene and the North American tournaments, I guess. So, Andy, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing today?
Oh, great. I'm just happy to be here. It's awesome to be back on the live show. I've done an interview section before in the past, and now I get an opportunity to talk with you guys about not only what I've been up to, but also LCQ and how I see things transitioning there.
Hell yeah, hell yeah. So thanks for the time to hang out with us today. So let's get right into it, because you talked about a little bit of your start, or how you had an interview with Ian before, as that you could find on Spotify, by the way. Everybody, I'm gonna have to plug that in. But if not, let's reiterate a bit how you got your start within Valorant, because I know when you had the conversation with Ian, you were mentioning how you were trying to compete a little bit more within like that CS:GO scene in the past. You went to your first, maybe even LAN event, if I'm not mistaken, with MCE, or if not, competed with him in the past as well. So would you have stayed within Counter-Strike if Counter-Strike still had the same type of support as Valorant did today? Or was it something else that attracted you to join and play Valorant instead of CS?
I think it was just it happened during a very interesting point for a lot of people because it's when COVID started. That's at the same time Valorant was coming out,
Yeah.
and I was a software developer working full time at that point. So when we got sent home to start doing work, I was able to get a lot of my daily tasks done within a shorter amount of time than I would normally when being at the office. So I was playing Valorant with a couple of friends, specifically like Pure R, who played for
Mhm.
Xset,
Yeah.
and he and I were just grinding the game with friends. We eventually hit the rank Valorant, and then when we saw a couple of like our old friends get signed to like Immortals, like Bjor and Kohler, and we realized they came from Counter Strike, we were like, wait a second, maybe this is completely viable. Maybe we could go pro, and that kind of like rejuvenated it. So even though like I was working full time, I had a little bit more to be able to throw it into playing the game. And I kind of ran with that for as long as I could. And then eventually that led to the Dahunka Bonkaloo's making the close qualifier and then getting signed by Dark Zero.
That's actually the next thing that I wanted to ask about. What was that process like getting picked up by Dark Zero? Like, did they approach you? Because they were actually pretty new into Valorant previously, their only game being Rainbow Six. So that was kind of their newest venture into something outside of Siege.
It's kind of like it's a mixed feeling of emotions because it's a little bit of a blur. Because I remember when I remember it was getting really stressful because I started having to go back into the office. So I was actually going to work, doing my 8 hour like day, going on to practice, and then competing all of the night and rinse and repeating that and doing that
God.
all the time. So when we eventually had our really good close qualifier run, where I think we took out BBG, Beast Coast, and Space Station. Yeah, we took out all three of those guys, and then we made it to the close. We were approached by Soar Gaming and DZ, and then I think On the Way Esports, which eventually became
Mm.
the Noble squad that became TSM Academy. And DZ was the one that was most interested in relocating us, making sure that we were able to make this like a full time job. It came with it was actual employment. It wasn't just like a contract. So when DZ approached us and we started down that process, it was just like it was like, guys, we gotta get this deal going. Like there's too many things that are happening in all of our lives. I think Screwface was finishing up college. We had a couple Canadian players. It was like we were all over the place, and it was an amazing process that eventually allowed us to get signed with DZ. And I remember just the feeling of relief when I finally was able to take pen to paper and realize that all the hard work that I had put in the past year while working full time was going to be paid off.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so you've been doing a lot of that, if not all of it, as kind of the IGL of the teams that you've been playing on. I didn't hear the interview with Ian, but it says in here that you've got some stuff about kind of getting into the IGL role, playing against your dad.
For me, the IGL role is one I think that has too much weight. I would feel like everything, if it goes wrong, it's my fault. Maybe you can kind of skew that thought process. Maybe you feel the same way. Can you talk to us
There's
about kind of getting into IGL and working through it?
That's actually kind of funny because I'm not the IGL for nearest airport. I'm
Ooh.
actually
Oh.
Aleko is, and this is something that I can talk about this
Mhm.
because you're right. When the weight of like the when your team performs bad and you end up losing a match, the IGL is the one who takes the brunt of the
Mm,
responsibility, and that is something that I've also dealt with in the past because I have had to IGL in prior teams or in different situations, and I've always felt that. So when Aleko came onto the squad and he was wanted to take up that mental responsibility as the IGL, I became a much more profound mid rounder to reveal some of that stress and also be like, hey, I'm working in this with you.
Mhm.
Because he's the one who makes a call at the beginning of every round, but then he and I will kind of work together and get the rounds to complete more efficiently. So he gets to be more in the game rather than kind of just having to be like the ward. Because I think with most IGLs and most systems, a lot of people look at their IGL as kind of dead weight because they're the ones focusing on the economy, the money, the alts,
mm,
the strategies, the anti-strats. What are they doing? Looking for patterns. And one of the things that we wanted to do on nearest airport was he may be taking the brunt of that responsibility, but as players around us, specifically me, I can increase my game IQ to be able to allow us to run a more efficient system
Mhm.
that in turn wins more.
So, how does that system work in terms of preparing yourselves with, like, for example, Pearl just came out, and then you're like, okay, I'm faced now with this map. What type of agent composition should I run? How am I running this? So, what's your thought process trying to develop the right quote unquote meta, the right composition, or the right strategies to be able to play a map? Because we talk about, especially on defense, it's all about trying to gain map control. So, how do you piece all this together?
When you're looking at a new map, there's a couple of different factors that go into it. The first one would be, I think, like agent composition. You kind of look at the map, you look at the choke points, you look at how the engagements, like, are there going to be close engagement, far engagements? Are there a lot of are there a lot of different connectors? Are there a lot of like lurk potential? And you pick the agents that kind of fit those roles, and then you work with it. And then from there, you
Mm,
start to develop a game plan where it's like, okay, with this comp, what's the purpose of like this setup? What is the purpose of taking like say on Pearl, like how do we deal with holding art in Italy? How are we going to hold with dealing like with belong? How are we going to hold with this? And then you pick the agents and you kind of see that what utility they can have and how it
mhm,
can be applied to taking those kind of control. So
mhm,
when you're asking me about how we create a game plan looking at a new map like Pearl, it's like, well, first, how are we going to deal with the taking map control? Secondly, what are our players' strengths and weaknesses? Because you always want to play into what your players are going to be naturally good at. If you
mhm,
try to condition them to play something that they're inherently just not going to be very comfortable on, even on a new map, you're going to fall into like inconsistencies. And then the third one is surprise factor. There's a lot of picks that I think people forget how to deal with. An example of that would be with the Phoenix buffs. Phoenix has a six
yeah,
orb alt. When you're playing Ascent, if you just orb farm, you literally play the game 6v5 for half of the rounds, just with that alone.
yeah.
And that it's really easy to play against, but when you haven't seen it for so long, it's really easy to throw teams off of it. So when it comes to Pearl, it's like, do we want the consistency or do we want to throw teams off with just like a crazy pick that they're not going to be expecting? Playing to our players' strengths, and then developing setups that are going to allow us to always be in an advantageous situation with our map control.
Mm,
So, with you talking about kind of like the process of coming up with these ideas, that's something that a more established, like big organization team is going to have the resources to have like a whole team of people working together to come up with that. Have you found that kind of being in like an unsigned team, there is a big difference between what it's like in terms of having support, a lot of support staff behind you to be able to provide input? What is that difference like for you?
It's actually kind of funny because on my free agent team, I have more support staff than I actually did when I was playing on assigned professional
that's
teams.
awesome.
And it's
That's
kind of
wild.
crazy because I kid you not, there's probably 10 to 11 people, including the 5 players that are working with us on nearest airport, that are just doing it out of their free time, out of the goodness of their heart. And they have again, there's no disrespect to my prior orgs, but they have taught me so much more about Valorant and how to structure, or basically how to build the underlying structure to a successful team. I feel like a year ago I would have said I knew a decent amount about Valorant. I knew a decent amount about like teamwork and whatnot. Now I feel like there's I've grown so much as a player, but I also know so much less, and it's funny to sit to like feel like that. But I'm at the point in my career where the support staff I have now is absolutely phenomenal. We have an analyst who is picking up patterns against any kind of or any team that we see as a threat, and we will build a game plan that's just like, all right, so um, or for example, like a match against DZ, because again, I live with Kyle and Adam, so I've told them this. Our analyst found that Ange was the key to Ange was the key to their success. So if we took Ange out, their win percentage for the round went down to like 30%. So it's like if you take out Ange while playing, they they have a 30% chance to win the rounds. And we were able to like find that analytical data, but due to the fact that we had a really awesome analyst working with us. And then as for coaches, it's like I have a head coach who is very harsh and very nitpicky with the criticism he's giving, but it's always valid because he's playing the statistics. And this is something that I've also learned as I've gone on, where a lot of the times in my past teams, I've been playing Valorant or making decisions that I wanted to like help teammates, or I was making emotional decisions. And what my head coach has kind of helped me, what Frost has helped me realize is I need to make decisions that are based on statistics. They all have to be. You got to play the stats. And the biggest example I could give of that is if letting one of my teammates die puts us in an advantageous situation because I play it then properly, I need to do that and not worry about leaving or not worry about wanting to help somebody too much because again, the emotions can't dictate how Valorant is played. It has to become more statistical and mathematical probabilities. Sorry, I know this is kind of like a little bit of a
No,
rant,
you're
but-
good.
No, this is super fun, actually.
So you want to help out the boys. You were a player for the boys previously. Now you're just trying to become a better all around player.
Yeah, it's the statistical part of it. An
Yeah.
example of that would be on Ascent. It's like if you're getting mid crunched and there's 3 people in mid, you just react to one of the mains, and it doesn't matter if one of your guys is down mid. You get a bomb site for free, and as long as you're playing with that in mind, you're going to be able to make consciously better decisions that are going to lead to statistically more favorable round wins in your gameplay.
Well, and so you talked about these coaches, these analysts, kind of doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. Maybe you can't speak for them, but for you, right? Where does the motivation to just keep on keeping on, no matter kind of how tall the wall seems, for Andersin to want to climb? What is driving you, and maybe even the players or the coaches or analysts on your team that are doing it out of the kindness of their hearts?
I think what's driving me is I've always known I could compete at a top level, and I've always wanted to keep pushing myself. And now I'm in an environment where I am pushed every single day, and when I'm at that point, I'm like, this is what I've always wanted. And it doesn't matter if I'm a free agent. It doesn't matter who I'm playing with. If I'm learning and progressing, then that's progress. And even if I like say ultimately fail in the end, I tried my best, and I can live with that. And that's kind of what's keeping me like going forward. It's like I want to if I'm going to fail, I want to know that I did my absolute best. And that involves like training regimens, VOD reviewing, being very critical, going in like after practice to review my own game with the coaches, work on my decision making, dry running in servers, being able to like even one thing that we recently started doing when that has really helped me is like as an Omen, I suck at playing like a C site. So my teammates and I will go into a server and they will literally just hit C 20 times in a row and let me be able to like play with my utility and work on getting better as like a site anchor. And it's just like stuff like that where it's like I've never had this in other team environments. And even though I'm a free agent, it's like I feel like I'm better off than even when I was signed in terms of how much I'm progressing. It's a weird situation to be in, but I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to not only learn and apply myself, but being able to do it with a group of phenomenal people.
Yeah. And how difficult does this conversation come about now as a group where unfortunately at some point, because you are a free agent team, that this might get broken up, right? Because now we're talking about nearest airport with 11 people, including staff and players, but an org most likely might pick up a player or two, or a team without the coach, without the analysts, or whatnot, because they already have it under within their organization. So how does that come about within like the team structure that you currently have as a free agent team?
It's important to have those conversations because obviously that's a real situation that could potentially happen. But
Hmm.
for us, or at least my mindset on it that I've discussed with my teammates, is until we get to that point, let's just put our all in this.
Hmm.
And we know that that may be a possibility. And if it does happen, we got to be happy for the opportunities that people are receiving. But it doesn't mean that we have to stop progressing and moving forward. And that's kind of like the mindset that I'm approaching it with, where it's like this might happen, but until it does, let's put our absolute all into this and let's keep working as hard as we possibly can to
Hmm.
give us that opportunity, that chance. Because even if
Yeah.
getting signed as like a team is like a 2% or 1% chance, that's still worth putting the effort in to get there.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sorry. I was gonna say. So obviously, one of the really big things that we've had come out in the news this year is this whole idea about what's going to happen in the 2023 format with
Mhm.
this sort of pseudo franchising system with the partnership program. What was your initial reaction to that?
I was actually very optimistic
Mhm.
about the process, but as things have started to as the doors started to close more and more and more, it's a little worrisome, but I do not believe that Riot would not have plans in place that would allow
Mhm.
tier 2 growth.
Mhm.
They have a
Mhm.
League of Legends system that is very successful. And there they have a tier two system that cultivates new talent to allow them to play in the tier one. And I am going to have to believe that that will be the same for Valorant.
So I guess to that point,
Oh God.
Okay,
Actually, tell us about
to
that
be
tweet.
fair,
What is that tweet?
this tweet was implied when kind of everybody was getting dropped left and right because
Mm.
yeah.
I haven't had, or I had some opportunities and some trials that I went along with, and then they didn't end up going in my favor. And then like I said, I live with Screwface and so then when they got dropped, we're all just like, oh fuck, we
Mm.
just moved. Now we have a lease, and everyone's homeless. We're just like, God damn it, man.
Yeah. Shit.
So okay, so uh, to that point for like the definitely not franchising the Riot partnership, if not necessarily the tier 2 scene, because like you said, Riot has to be doing something with that. That is the only way that something makes it. We've seen franchising just absolutely murder things kind of across esports as a whole. How optimistic are you? We kind of talked about this on the show earlier, that maybe one of these teams that makes it into a partnership program is going to be looking for a full team, right? We singled out TSM as a whole, saying they haven't been really a top 10 team. I guess maybe top 10 you can put them in there, and they might make it into one of the 6 or 8 or 10 slots for the partnership program. At that point, they're probably looking for new players to then bolster their roster to be able to compete with the X sets, the optics, and stuff like that. How optimistic are you? Maybe at that prospect, that nearest airport becomes a team that is in the partnership program.
That's kind of what we're hoping for because I think what's happening now is um, a lot of these teams that have been dropped aren't competing. And I had a very controversial statement about that, which actually I'll share it. I'll out
Yeah,
everybody.
Yeah, do
Hell yeah,
it.
hell yeah. Bring us the
yeah.
Because
spice.
essentially, it's like if your team got dropped and you, as a five, stopped playing together, you were never a team. You were actually just paycheck stealers.
Mm.
And now that a lot of teams are getting dropped and the players are just like posting their LFT posts, it's like they're not grinding, they're not trying. So my
Mhm.
whole standpoint was like, listen, there might be an org that makes it into franchise. Like there potentially could be, again, the 1% chance. It's like there
Mhm.
could be an org that makes it into the franchising and they're going to be looking for a team. And what we need to do as a five is constantly keep working throughout this because even though there's not a lot of opportunities, there's not a lot of like it's a really grim future. It's like if we're at the top of everybody in this period of drought, when people start to come back in, or if there's that one team, we'll be the ones looked at. And that's the kind of mindset that I'm going in with it and our team's going in with it. Is like we need to be at the top of everything right now, because when things, even when tier 2 gets like rejuvenated, say like we don't even get a franchising spot, but like say DZ comes back, if we're at the top of that, we'll be the first choice rather than all these other teams. And that will mean that all the work that we put in is still justified.
Ironically enough, just like Dark Ratio right now. They're just like grinding it out and doing awesome in a tier 2 scene.
Mm-hmm.
So is that how... No. I was just going to say, is that how you see kind of the future for you guys? Do you envision you guys staying together as a team and then getting that opportunity to be picked up by an org and run off into the sunset together? Or do you see your future going a different way?
Realistically, that's the fever dream that we all hope for. But I'm prepared for the vast amount of different scenarios to be plausible. So it's like if that means us 5 staying together and getting picked up by an org, I would love that. If that means somebody or a couple individuals on our team get amazing opportunities, I'm happy for those people. And if ultimately at the end, if like all fails, if that means me going back into a job of just software development, I mean, I tried my best and I can be happy with that. And there's no regrets there, because again, throughout this entire opportunity of being able to play video games as a profession, I've met a lot of amazing individuals, and I've had a lot of life lessons that I could apply for years to come, and
Sure.
in any kind of endeavor that I'll pursue.
For me, I kind of want to talk about this tier 2 scene, and at the same time talk about the label of tier 2, because when I'm looking at it from an outside perspective, and I as even as a caster, I was like, oh yeah, like, you know, this person, X player, Y player, you know, has been grinding into tier 2 scene and now has an opportunity to play in an open circuit against TSM, blah blah blah. But I kind of almost feel at some point that the tier 2 scene could almost pretty much resemble the quality of matches and scrims and competition that you could get at the tier 1 level right now. So tell me a little bit about this quote unquote tier 2 scene in terms of the competition, the teams that you have to play against, the NSGs on LAN and online. Does it feel like if you don't make it into the franchise team and you're tier 2, you're just like bottom feeders at this point of the tier 1 scene, or how do you see this area of the competition?
I have a hot take on this.
Let's go.
If the tier 1 teams actually played in these NSG weeklies or the monthlies, they'd lose more than they'd win, and that's why they don't play, because they don't want to tarnish their own image. The reason, no, I know. I mean,
it's
like,
true.
Think about it. Like, the Knights, like I think 15K that DZ won.
Yeah.
They played version 1. They took out version 1. They played. Who else they played? There was like a couple T1 orgs that they played and they knocked out. But it's like people just say, oh, it's like a Mickey Mouse tournament, or people will throw the excuses of just like, oh, we were using it for practice, so it doesn't really matter. When in reality, a lot of these teams will not play it because they actually lose.
Yeah.
The difference between tier 1 and tier 2 is tier 1 is more refined on their fundamentals. So they will make less basic mistakes, but they still make mistakes. If you watch like I think it was, well, who did EG play? It was EG versus, let me look real quick. I don't know.
Are we looking at VCTs?
Yeah, I'm saying it was FaZe versus EG.
Yeah.
Even in LCQ, if you watch that game, oh my god, it is riddled through with mistakes. There are so many, it's not even funny. But the point being is if you throw FaZe against like a tier 2 team, FaZe would make less like minor mistakes than the tier 2 team would. But that doesn't mean that tier 2 team can upset the T1 team just because people are going to have bad days. So I don't see tier 2 as bottom feeders. I see it as the tier 1 teams are probably more afraid of the tier 2 teams than they are of other tier 1 teams. Because tier 1 teams are generally always they're going to play smart. They're going to play the stats. They're going to play the statistically, everything they do is going to make sense. And then they're going to have their own plays. So it's like if you have proper anti-stratting and proper analytics on them, it's really easy to play against the tier 1 teams.
And Just to add real quick too, it's like the example is also Pittsburgh Knights on Ascent when they almost went like 27-0 or something on that map and were
Mhm.
unstoppable within that tournament. Open bracket, open qualifier qualifies for the group stages. Then the other one is Ghost Gaming, who's been playing in the NSGs for like the longest time without those tier one teams participating. But when they got into the group stages, also made some head turn within the group stages until playoffs happened and people realized how EG played. I think it's always like those big hit and misses once you're actually competing against each other, where Valorant then becomes, if you're on that day with the fundamentals that you've built within the structure that you've talked about here, Anderson, you could still beat any tier one team, which is interesting
Oh
to see.
yeah.
But yeah, it's
I
something
think
that
one of
it's
the big
yeah.
ones was. Do you remember a team called Zero Marksman Silver?
Yes,
Yeah, when they
yes,
took out T1 and they took out TSM.
yep, yep, yep,
And that
yep.
was done. Actually, we one of their players is a now supporting coach for our team because again, our coach Frost was working with them at the time.
Yes.
And what they showed us, what they did was just a lot of basic analytic work. They found
Mhm,
out the patterns of how they were going to play on the map they were going to play. They used the patterns and they won.
mhm.
Simple as that.
Oh shit, you guys have Frost?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's our coach.
Nice, nice, nice. That's
Yeah.
that's actually awesome, actually.
Yeah,
Uh,
Hector's an amazing guy.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
so I've got something kind of just like looping, or maybe even like the talking about like the tier ones not wanting to play and the tier twos, whatever it may be. How do you feel about the? I feel like there's always a conversation for every team, at the whether it's the top of the list or the bottom of the list, that we're saving strats, we're saving strats, we're saving strats. That to me feels like it's incredibly overplayed. But I'm also a peanut brain. I've never competed, I've never done something like that. So maybe could you either? How do you feel about that kind of excuse, as somebody just being like, well, we have to save strats and that's why we lose.
it's it's an excuse. That's
Mhm.
most of the time their strat book isn't that well defined. There is no saving strats. It's just simply there is no gain for them to play it. So it's like if say like FaZe Clan. Say FaZe Clan was to play in like an NSG weekly. If they win it, they don't really get anything from it besides like extra practice and a tiny bit of money.
Yeah.
But if they
Mhm.
lose it, oh, they take a rep hit, a huge one. And then you have pissed off fans, and you have like the inconsistency. They're going to go down massively on their old leaderboard. So for them, it's safer to play in these bigger ones where they don't have to risk any of their, I guess, their brand,
Mhm.
and they can just play in the VCT like system or the franchising one for the future, and they don't have to worry about any of that potential like catastrophe. Because a lot of these T1 teams, even when like they're scrimming, regardless if they're practicing or not, they lose to the T2
Yeah.
teams all the
Yeah.
time.
And even as one of the best examples too that I like to look at is Sentinels. Like even if you advertise that you are like the cream of the crop in North America and still lose, you could still fucking play with that and get the impressions and then still have so many fucking viewers for every fucking match that you play. So maybe sometimes
Yeah.
depending on the branding, you just play along with that as well and see how you go from there. Because I think even for FaZe Clan, if you lose within the tier two scene, taking them for example again, they still have good enough branding to be like the Schmeeg or whatnot, to
Mhm.
not lose too much
Yeah, to not
as a
lose too
whole
much
team
of
brand. But yeah,
it.
definitely as content creators and whatnot, I think they're doing a great job from player to player going to that, where even tier two players or even players that are trying to grind into that path to pro don't have that luxury to be able to use their branding to keep that fan base around. But we'll have plenty of time to talk about Sentinels actually, because it's time to go for a break. And when we come back, we're going to dive deep into the LCQ in North America, going match to match, and then we'll talk about Sentinels then.